All right, so we want to talk about meeting students where they are, and we're using the concept of from the quad to the cloud. So let's define what that means a little bit here, but I'll give maybe a little bit more introduction for myself, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague Ashunda. So as Jordan said, my role here at Adana Learn, VP for Learning Design and Inclusivity, but I have been a faculty member. I went through the faculty ranks starting in the 90s. I won't get too specific. And I did that in the California State University system at a couple different campuses, and then became director of faculty development at a campus, and then directed efforts system-wide for the Cal State system across the 23 campuses, and then came into this position about a year and a half ago. And I'm excited to continue this effort in working with higher education to have the greatest impact on students as much as possible, just creating successful learning experiences. So I will stop there. And Ashunda, if you could introduce yourself for a moment.
Absolutely. Hello and welcome, everyone. So yes, my name is Ashonda and I am a success coach. I've been coaching higher education for over 10 years now. Absolutely love what I do. My motto is meeting students where they're at and building them up from there. I have worked with students from onboarding on through to graduation, all levels of students from all over the world, actually. My background is psychology, currently a doctorate student for industrial organizational psychology. So I really take on a psychological approach, but staying in a space of coaching as well, keeping it safe, but also personable, where students feel comfortable just kind of sharing anything that they want to bring to me. And that typically come in a variety of things that they want to share. So that's what I'm bringing to this session today. And I'm happy to be here with all of you.
Awesome. Thanks, Ashunda. All right, so let's dive in. And if you haven't done this before, this will be simple. Let's have you do a response here. And I'm going to copy the link into the chat, but give you a little bit of context here. So we want to just get a quick blurb from you as to how you're feeling about your current working situation. So as you think of yourself and going through your job and your role and what that's been like lately, what are you feeling? And so this is going to be an answer garden in the chat now. And if you click on that link, as I'm going to do on my screen, oops, I missed the link, is we will then go into the browser and you'll be able to put in 1 to 2 words. I think I have a 20 character limit, and you can put in as many of those words, those feelings as you want to, and we'll see the cloud come and build and develop together and kind of get a group consensus. We're looking at 43 participants, so great. And I will keep refreshing and we'll see how that builds out. All right, it's starting to populate. I get nervous if it doesn't. Great. Yeah, overwhelmed, anxious, solid. Okay, good. So maybe just really leaning into what's been happening, making the most of. Melancholy, maybe a little bit sorted, thinking about the past. Troubled, yeah, that could certainly mean many things. Could be troubled about the here and now, troubled about the future. There's some heavy stuff out there. I'll do a refresh here and see if we get any repeats. And again, you can enter as many as you want to. There we go. Okay. Excited, thankful, and busy. Okay. So excited and thankful. Love that you can always find the good. You can always find those things that are blessings to be thankful for, what you have that's good, even if there are things that may not be exactly the way you want them to be at the moment. So I love that. Crazy blessed. Just saw that. Awesome. Yeah, good. So not all gloom and doom. Tough stuff, but I think you're doing a great job of dealing with it and having that positive attitude, and maybe looking hopeful toward the future. I'll do one more refresh. And I'm going to kind of squint in and see anything that we haven't seen before. Hamster wheel. There you go. I like that, creative. Work from home being a good thing. Yeah. And that's that sort of new reality, how there's going to be more of that in many cases happening, a different type of balance. Okay, good. So let's pop back here, and I'm going to go into full screen again. And sorry, it may shift your screens as I kind of take over with the slide here. So let me just pause here for Answer Garden. For those of you that haven't done Answer Garden before, extremely easy to create. And it's at answergarden.ch. You can go there for free and just put a prompt up, and then you can have your audience go and put in responses anywhere from 20 characters to I think 40, it might be the maximum, because that way you can get those individual word or dual word tag clouds that form nicely. So that's a great icebreaker or a great pulse check to do with your students in your different capacities as you're meeting with them. Obviously student groups, not individual students. So goals for today. So we want to see what we can do to become more attuned to that work-life school harmony and what that can look like. And I love a lot of the harmony I was sensing and a lot of the positivity I was sensing in that Answer Garden. Applying greater emotional intelligence and empathy. That's something that we can always do. So kind of reflecting on that and thinking about some tools or techniques or approaches. Understanding ways to effectively facilitate learning and community. What your role might be doing in doing that and how to do that effectively. And then how do you make it work collaboratively and asynchronously in that new reality that we'll talk about. So the quad to cloud context. So that's a term we're using because as we were used to, well, let me go back. As we were used to, of course, students were, doing their quad life, and I'm talking traditional student. I know I'm generalizing, but students who may wake up on or near campus and get up, check in on things briefly, have a snack, and walk across the campus to their classes. They have meeting places maybe in the quad or in the library, and they do those things off and on all day, go back and forth between different types of learning situations. Maybe there's work on campus or off campus. I know that's different for all folks, but it tended to be very grounded to that quad type experience, that local experience. And now everything's, of course, been busted open to where it's much more cloud-based, remote at a distance. And I know that it's gone back and forth, and we'll talk about that reality. So what we want to do is dig a little bit deeper here. And I'm going to grab this link and make sure that I get it into the everyone post. So I want to do one more activity here, and we're going to go to a Padlet, because we want to learn a little bit more from you all as to what your situations are. I know many of you introduced yourselves in the chat, and that's really, title and role, but we want to hear a little bit more about what you're seeing and experiences. So in that first column, what are significant changes to how students are expected to learn within their courses? So more of the synchronous, in-person maybe, or at least synchronous type experiences. How are they expected to work on their learning, their educational efforts outside of class? So more of the asynchronous beyond the classroom. And then what are some significant changes to students' lives outside of their educational efforts? So other things that they're trying to do around their education, other campus-based experiences, or even beyond that. And then anything else that's changed in students in the last few years. This isn't entirely pandemic focused, although that certainly, again, accelerated many of the changes from quad to cloud. But this isn't just about the pandemic. Okay, so HyFlex. Yeah, for folks that aren't aware of what HyFlex, I'll do a very brief definition of that, but I think many do know what that is now. HyFlex is you're going to have a live course meeting taking place, and you're going to have some students who are there in person while simultaneously have some students attending remotely, and the instructors trying to engage both groups and maybe across the two groups and getting them to engage with each other. So it involves a very high level of planning and facilitation and technology, learning situation, learning space that needs to accommodate that for it to be effective. So there's much more HyFlex out there. Student engagement, critical, absolutely. We'll talk about that. Knowing who their professors are. Yeah, and what can you do as a professor to set that tone? And so we'll talk about that strategy for sure. Students needing to take a more proactive role. Yeah, and they need to be aware of that, and they need to be enabled to do that for sure, inside the class meetings and also outside. It's much more challenging for them to navigate all the things involved to be successful. So they need to have that awareness and those skills and those tools. More collaboration, flexibility, there's that term flex again, even if it's not high flex. Students expecting remote resources, absolutely, and those should be available, and we'll talk about access and those types of things. So again, being more proactive, I see more of that. Let me jump over to column 2 here. I won't exhaust all of these. Yeah, just distractions at home. They're sharing space with multiple people, and there are lots of things happening at home, whether it's they are a caregiver or roommates in very tight quarters. They're sharing equipment, sharing bandwidth, sharing space. Separation between school and home has definitely blurred, and work and home has definitely blurred. Learning in silos or in isolation, that can be problematic. Yeah, I see those two with each other there. Mental health and wellness, absolutely. And we've had a pretty big focus on that for sure. Juggling more access, network, equipment, devices, absolutely. So I think second, we've covered most of those. Let's look at the third one. So outside of their educational efforts, yeah, job loss, yeah, financial insecurity, being unhoused at times, food insecurity, illness, mental health, all the stress, building and building. Okay. So I'm seeing a lot of the same significant things here. And then last column, any of the others. Stressed about the pandemic, yeah. Let's see, impact so many students, and then they might learn to be more flexible and or innovative when addressing problems or changes. So yeah, there could be a silver lining in that some of these things that students are learning to deal with might lead them into some of the work skills and collaboration skills and remote skills that they actually need to navigate their adult lives, their professional lives. So if that can be adapted into, then that can be a positive. They don't feel as engaged. They don't feel maybe as represented. Okay. All right, the pressures of always being connected, yes. All right, let's jump back. Thank you much for that. And let's compare to some of the things we've propped up as far as the new reality for the classroom-based experience. So being online wasn't their choice for most of these students. I know for one very large system, there were only about 5% of the courses that were online, and they went to about 97% at one point online all of a sudden. So it wasn't their choice. At the same time, they're maybe having to do mixed modalities. Some courses are online, some were allowed to be in person, so they were having to go back and forth. Or there was this toggling. For these weeks, you're online, these weeks you're back in person. Imagine trying to do that if you're a student who's from far away or international. You're trying to do this based on the campus in a dorm and then off campus all of a sudden. So very big situation changes. Levels of access and engagement we talked about, and then feeling that distance and disconnect. So you covered those realities, obviously, because you were in the midst of them. Okay, so what are some of the instructor efforts that you can do? So we'll, from the perspective of an instructor, is begin with empathy-minded approaches. That's huge. And so we've really propped that up as sort of our beginning. And when we work with faculty, regardless of the pandemic, is it should begin with an empathy-minded approach. And that really flips it to being about the students. So there's an exercise that I'll share with you and give you a link to in just a moment. Getting connected to their reality. So how can you do that check-in? How can you hear their voices, know their experiences, their situations? Make sure they have everything they need. You can't provide all the devices, but you can enable access by the way you create and share materials. Offering frequent and timely feedback. So that's going to help to keep them on track and also decrease that sense of isolation and not knowing what's happening. And then checking in early and often. So let's look at putting some of those into action here then. So the first one that we use quite a bit is this empathy mapping exercise. And the link is here. I don't have it as a copyable link, so I'll just let you grab that from the slides if you want to, unless one of my teammates is able to drop it in the chat. So this is where you can really take pause and think about who your students are And what are they going to have to do? What sorts of things will they see and review? What are they expected to say and how do they interact? What are they thinking about? And what are they hearing and learning from others as they go through your course experience? So thinking about it from their perspective, there's these different questions that we have instructors reflect on. And then also across the bottom is thinking about their physical needs, emotional needs, social needs, and intellectual needs. Traditionally, we haven't done this as instructors. We haven't thought about those. And the way I like to think about this is instructors want to really kind of move up the level of blooms and push students along through their learning process. But you're going to have to cover Maslow's first before you can get to Bloom's. If they don't have their basic needs covered, then you're not going to be able to have students who are going to move along effectively. So you really need to kind of take these into consideration and think about what their experiences are related to their needs and then how they can progress. So we've got a good resource for you there to consider how to incorporate that, particularly at the outset. And then some of the comments you made absolutely were about how to have a community. So how, as an instructor, do you initiate that community type feeling for your course? And then how do you connect with them, but also get them connected with each other? So some of the tools we use are Flipgrid is a great one for you to maybe do your welcome video and then invite students to then post an introduction of themselves. And what's nice about Flipgrid, okay, first, it's free. Absolutely free, and they've actually ramped up their features in the last 6 months. So it's a great tool. Students take to it really well. It's easy to use. There are lots of different ways you can use it, and you can embed those Flipgrids into your learning management system. So that can be right in there, sort of in the workflow of what you're expecting them to do. So that's a great thing to do for introductions and also to do it intermittently around discussions. It's a good alternative to text-based threaded discussions. So you're giving them all a voice and they're all having a presence together. That's a great way to see faces and learn names. So, and you can make it fun as well. So it doesn't all have to be serious. So just in the chat, how many of you have used a tool like Flipgrid? Maybe you've used Padlet. Some of you maybe have used VoiceThread. I don't promote that quite as much just because there's a little bit more of a learning curve and a little bit more of a cost factor in there. And I know that's a reality for sure for instructors and for students. What sorts of tools? Okay, I see Flipgrid. Awesome. We used Padlet a moment ago. That can be used for so many different things than what we did briefly. VoiceThread is, yeah, I've been a big fan of VoiceThread since probably about 10, 12 years ago when they came out, maybe even longer now. And they also have a great focus on universal design and making things accessible. Good, so pretty aware group within the attendees here as far as Padlet and Flipgrid. Go React, that's a new one to me. Thanks, Ebony. Jamboards. Jamboards are similar to Padlet if you haven't used those before. And then of course you can also prop up Google Docs and slides and have students dive in and collaborate either as a group or in breakout groups. And you can do polling and all sorts of things. I see poll everywhere, that's a great one. Okay, good. I'm gonna move us along here, keep us on track. If any of you know about Michael Wesch, that's who's pictured here. He is phenomenal in creating videos, and he does these bumper videos. You may have heard that term before. So going into a module, let's say you're doing weekly modules with your course, going into a module and coming out of a module, he'll do these very brief videos. And I know you see 11 minutes on the screen here, that's his tutorial. And this 11 minutes can seem like a long video, but this is one of the most sort of resource-packed, technique-packed videos that's out there. And he's just a master of developing these things. And right now, I think he's in his driveway. He's done them on his skateboard, on bicycle. He does them in his house. He'll duct tape it to his window and get the lighting through the glass as he's filming it. So it's very low tech because it's all about being high touch to the students. It's not about high production. It's about being real and connecting. So just doing 1 to 2 minute bumper videos, sort of, okay, here's what's coming up this week and here's what I'm hoping you'll gain from it. Great job last week. And then at the close of a module, maybe, you know, just doing a little bit of review and checking in with them. This is what I saw you learn this week. These are the great efforts that were there. And so you can see those 5 steps or 5 tips on the left. So in the links in the chat, awesome. Thanks, Kelly. Really, really rich resource. Yeah, I'm kind of jealous about how easy he makes it look and just how engaging he is on the camera. And I mean that in a good way. So we talked about access through the Padlet. Many of you mentioned access to resources. So, as we were faced with the pandemic and everybody going to remote instruction, which is very different than online learning. So just diving into remote instruction and not having that intention of having done so, and then all of a sudden having to have your courses replaced with online resources, heavily we saw people going into 50-minute Zoom recordings, talking into the camera and just going on and on and on. And that wasn't effective for most students, and for many students, it just wasn't accessible. 508 compliance, or just accessible, meaning their technology device and their bandwidth. These were massive video files. So we kind of had that experience on the left where people were getting one limited type of experience. Then we started to be able to work with people to get them more aware and more trained up, so to speak, to be able to deliver what we see over to the far right, where you've got multiple modes of content and delivery and interaction taking place. You've got a slide that now has succinct comments because you're going to give a visual. You're also giving the narration live. It's also being captioned, and it's also being recorded and made available to students after the fact so they can get at it again when they need to review or when they have better bandwidth or greater access. And on the right, you can see the instructor and the participants are sharing some related resources and commentary. So that's how you can provide those rich content experiences to try and keep students engaged as they've gone from quad to the cloud. So Kava, I'm not as familiar with, thanks Ebony, and Screencast-O-Matic is another great one. Yeah. I even use, what am I using? Snagit for just simple, quick things, but Zoom will do it well. If you have a 50-minute lecture, you can hit stop recording every 7 minutes when you finish a subtopic, and it'll create individual recordings instead of that one 50-minute block. And so even just teaching instructors that, and then you can embed those as individual recordings throughout your module. Okay. I mentioned offering frequent and timely feedback. So how can you go from those high stakes assessments that are really just driving toward grading sometimes to then doing more frequent low stakes formative assessments that can be more variety and more frequent and give more feedback? And how can you help students to grow through a process that's not just focused on the grade, but it's focused on the learning that takes place and the discussion that takes place frequently around that, either as a course or amongst the peers. Okay, and I will continue to keep an eye on the chat, so feel free to use that. Menti is another great one for polling. Thanks, Ursula. And then how many of you are getting student feedback in a sort of formal way? I know you can do it informally all the time, sometimes just by body language and informal comments that are made or polling like we've mentioned here, but do you do a check-in with them? What we really recommend is for a traditional semester is at about week 3 or week 4, you do this early term feedback survey. And it's a way where you can actually check in with them. How is it going for them as far as the general course elements? We've got 5 questions there for course content. How is it working for them? For student engagement, for assessment and feedback. So this is something they can complete in 5 to 10 minutes and give you some rich feedback. And a lot of it's quantitative. You can scan the results pretty quickly and decide where you might need to hone in or ask them for more feedback. And you can also get some qualitative input from them as well. Some instructors, midterm is great. So getting midterm feedback. My opinion on that is it's getting a little bit late by the midterm. I like doing it about a quarter to a third, about a third of the way into the term. So you can make those early changes. When you get to the middle of the term, some students may have slipped down pretty far and may have needed support earlier. So Ursula, that's just my experience, my opinion there. But midterm is much better than what most folks are certainly doing by waiting for those student evaluations of teaching effectiveness, which in my opinion and based on research really does not offer much good input toward what took place for teaching and learning. Okay. Kelly put the link to this early term feedback survey in there, and it will elicit a copy of the Google form for you that you can then own on your own drive and adapt or adopt. You can change the name of it. You can change some of the items. You can put a different logo or color scheme, whatever you want to do. It's there for you if you want to make use of it. Okay, thanks, Ebony. Yeah, midterm engagement. Yeah, don't just do it at this 3 or 4 week you're always wanting to check in different ways, giving them feedback and getting feedback. Doesn't have to be formal, it doesn't have to be a survey to it. Okay, so what are some other ways? We've had some prompts along the way in the chat. What are some other ways to enable students successful course experiences as we've gone from quad to cloud largely? Other ideas that come to mind? What are some great techniques you are using or any of your peers? Rise 360 with pre-scoured material. Yeah, so through Articulate, there's Rise 360 where you can create some great learning materials, learning objects, if you will, where you can take slides and different elements and put them together where they can have this rich content experience. And you can even build in, if you want to, some knowledge checks. And you could make it even more like adaptive learning where a student can go through some of that content. They can answer a few questions. If they do well, they keep moving. If they struggle, then they may need to circle back or they may need to go to another resource. So that's just a quickie on that pre-course material. Okay, great. Checking in, yeah, check in early and often. Teach students how to learn. Yeah, learning how to learn, absolutely. So again, being transparent with them about what you're doing and why, having that conversation, absolutely. And then also having more of those formative assessments where they have many different types of opportunities to learn and to get feedback and to find out where they have strengths and where they may have weaknesses, and then to be able to correct and adapt. Yeah, weekly discussion prompt asking how students are doing. Great. And that goes along with those bumper videos. That's part of the intent of the bumper videos is, again, do a check-in and encourage students to give feedback. Convert rubrics to resource checklists for each competency. We're getting detailed there. I love it. Yeah, so many of our assessments could benefit from rubrics. They provide a lot for us on our intention, but also for students to know what's expected of them. And then it also enables a smoother grading process and less grade disputes, score disputes. So that can be really great. And those can be mapped to each of your course learning outcomes or program competencies. If you're doing competency-based education, it can be mapped to those. All right. Love it. Thank you. Keep the contributions coming anytime throughout. And I'm going to go ahead and just bump us forward and let's talk about Ashanda, talk about the student support experience. And just tell me when to advance at any time.
Absolutely. So we can go ahead and proceed forward. All right, so here we go. So the new reality for student experience and the support around that. So how the family dynamics drastic changes has caused lasting stresses. So again, back to that work-life school harmony. Not really putting it in terms of it being balanced because it just can't be balanced. Just got to have harmony amongst it all. Really understanding what these different environments look like, consist of, how the students need to show up in these spaces. And it won't necessarily be something that can be balanced out, but just kind of being okay with all those responsibilities and everything that it entails. Just being in those different environments and understanding that it really can't be balanced out. I mean, there's people that's been able to balance it out that I can learn a lot from them as many other people can learn, but it's just really having harmony, being accepting of these environments, and especially considering all the different changes that have taken place. Work is no longer work as many people had known it before. Of course, life within itself has changed drastically, as well as school. One minute they're able to be on campus, other minutes they're not able to be on campus. So just kind of being okay with all those spaces and having harmony with that in order to try to figure out a way to just kind of have equal amount of okayness and being able to proceed forward in these different spaces. So community has become more essential than ever before. So when I talk with students, a lot of them echo the same thing that they kind of would like community more, networking more, even though they might have online communities and it's really quiet. From my experience, it's really, really quiet. but they still echo the same things, that they just kind of want to network more. Depending on the course, they will connect more in group settings, like group assignments and things like that. And they will carry those connections from one course to the next course. However, that can break apart if they're not in the same courses and they have to start over again. So being able to just have like live sessions with the instructors, having breakout groups and things along those lines are really essential. And a lot of students are looking to have that community, especially in a space now where everyone is kind of confined to certain areas because of this pandemic. We never thought about how much community, was important for even ourselves, but as students, they're realizing that they need that community and they continue to ask for this community. Even if they are having these network spaces in group assignments and maybe study groups that they're putting together themselves, it doesn't seem to be enough. So if that can kind of continue to be like a thing in the online environments as much as possible, it's just really essential for them. And for the last bulletin point, support services increasing beyond like disability services. So a lot of students are struggling with emotional intelligence. They're having a hard time really, when we go back to the first bulletin point, with the work, life, school balance or harmony. So they're having a lot of difficulties in that space. So their emotional intelligence is really not as refined as they would need to be successful. So I am taking notice that they're constantly having to be reminded of what they're capable of, how they can, deal with their emotions as they try to figure out these new spaces or, these common spaces that they're having to be all over the place with. So what has been common is that a lot of students are needing mental health services and they're needing to get beyond like student success coaching. So being able to recognize that and noticing that they're, in a frenzy with their thoughts and ideas and their worthiness and feeling like they don't have the ability to do things. A lot of conversations that I'm having with students is along the lines of emotional intelligence and helping them harness that, helping them think more highly of themselves and not going into like this little pit of, depression. And I noticed earlier in the pandemic, a lot of students were needing to utilize mental health services that the schools are offering more than they had before. So that has been a hike. I'm sure whatever record keeping that they're keeping over there, they're noticing that it has been a hike over there because that emotional intelligence, if they're not able to really harness that, everything just becomes a blur for them, really difficult for them to manage. So that's a lot of conversations that I'm having is about that emotional intelligence. All right, so we can proceed forward to the next slide. All right, so how faculty and staff can stay aligned with support services. So it isn't a best practice just to have a plan set up of certain protocols in place to record and submit requests for extended support services. So maybe things are being recognized in the classroom environment. Maybe someone is speaking more than typical and maybe they're speaking out of term, they're not necessarily having language that's conducive to being productive and learning. Maybe you're noticing certain anxieties that are coming up for students, or maybe someone now they're not speaking as much, they're less engaged and things like that. So maybe there's some clues that you all are noticing in their classroom engagements and putting in place a way of recording these things and getting them the proper services beforehand. So sometimes I'll give you an example. Last year, I had a student and he was really frantic. His back was up against the wall. I was coaching him for probably like 2 hours. Collectively, we were trying to figure out what was the best approach of supporting him. This went on for a couple of weeks. He definitely needed the mental health services and he needed to he ended up having to take an incomplete for the course because he needed to do some outside mental services as well. But if these clues were, presented or recorded earlier on, and there was a means to really get that rectified as soon as the earliest signs were presented in his behavior. And he had a lot of rash behavior. He was doing a lot of things like emailing his entire cohort, sending me long text messages, and it was a lot of things that were taking place. However, like the second bulletin point, to regularly evaluate and update set procedures as needed so that every faculty and staff member will be aligned with proper protocols and procedures of really reporting these things and really staying abreast and really acknowledging and just kind of just being alert of those different behaviors that students might present would allow for a lot of pre-care, or what I'm thinking of, what's the word? I'm thinking like medical terms.
Preemptive, that's not medical. I don't know.
No, it's I can't think of it. I'm drawing a
Preventive,
blank right
preventive.
now. Preventative measures would be key, and it would save the student a lot of emotional stress. A lot of he really had I'll be open and honest. He had a mental breakdown, and he needed to separate himself from the school environment because that's the first thing to go, right? They drop a course, or they withdraw from a course, or maybe they'll take a leave of absence. But if we're paying attention, we can take preventive measures in order to make sure that the student or any student is getting whatever that they need, however that they need it, instead of getting them to a space where they're just going to totally abruptly disconnect and have all of these behaviors that's not conducive to the success of what it is that they're trying to accomplish. And continuous refresher trainings, just really staying abreast of what those proper procedures are. Because as we know, as time go by, we kind of forget how to do things or the need of getting things done. But if it's fresh in our minds, we'll always be able to just catch those before they just get out of hand. So I hope that was helpful in regards to just being attentive to students' needs and what they are currently.
Right. I put a question in the chat, Ashunda, see if folks here have any preventive measures in mind. We'll see if anything populates there. The refresher trainings, yeah. Anybody doing any refresher trainings? Any particular topics that come to mind? Or is it more in general? And I know there's silence. I'm just kind of waiting to see if anything populates there. But I'll go ahead and move us to the next slide here. So any other ways that you're seeing to support students' overall campus-based experience, again, in their new reality, quad to the cloud, or however you're thinking of it? Ooh, like that, Regina. Yeah, sometimes shy students won't speak up. We have to reach out to them. Another great reason to have so many different types of modalities for interaction. Something like a Padlet that's anonymous, polling that can be anonymous, different, getting them into breakout groups where they may be less shy, talking in smaller groups versus across the whole class. Again, my examples are classroom based, and there would be others as well. And just pausing here, Ashunda, you mentioned emotional intelligence, which is so critical. And one of the things I meant to kind of bring up earlier is that whole notion of the affective domain. As instructors, we go through so much of our content training and research training, and that's so much on the cognitive domain. And my background's kinesiology, as some of my colleagues know, and we did a lot on the psychomotor domain. But regardless of discipline, a lot of folks don't pay enough attention to the affective domain. So more of that social, emotional intelligence, those types of things. So it's a good thing to kind of check in across those different domains and think about how you're approaching, how you're working with students and how they're doing across those domains. I like that, Sheila. When somebody responds, how you doing? Fine, okay. body language, or how to kind of have more probing questions than that general lead-in question. Where can you take it from there? Maybe give me an example that something's making you happy at the moment, something that's troubling you, and things might open up a little bit more as you build rapport. Yeah, being flexible. Absolutely. Christine, anything you want to add to that? Any examples of being flexible in the give and take? I can, if you are coming up with something, or anybody else, but one example that I'm really interested in, again, from the instructional side of things and course based, is more people are starting to think about their hard deadlines for things. Why does there have to be 100% get it in by 11:59 p.m. or it won't be accepted, or we mark down a full grade? Why can't we be a little bit more flexible? One of the things I love is instructors, some I know, are starting to use a best by date. And that's to be the intended due date, but there's wiggle room beyond that. There's more flex room, or students might be given like a one free pass, because in a 16-month span, we're all going to have something come up in our lives unexpected, to some degree. And so how can we give students a little bit more freedom to have things come up, and how can we be a little more flexible? How can we build trust and rapport? Okay, let's see. Yeah, we want them to be proactive, but we can't just say it. It has to be enabled and taught, for sure. Yeah.
I also think it's essential just to kind of have that open door policy from the beginning, maybe implementing the idea of, being open about how they're feeling and how they're doing, just making it just really evident that it's okay, it's a safe space.
For sure. Yeah, and you don't need to open yourselves up completely to students, but in a professional way, you can still tell them about how you're doing. Tell them things that you've gone through professionally or as a student, relate to them. Otherwise, they can sometimes hold you up as this perfect standard, which is not the case, 100% not the case that any of us are perfect. Yeah, office hours, virtual office hours, multiple ways that they can reach out to you and connect with you, obviously with parameters and barriers as far as time and day and response time, but being present and being available for them, understanding the perspective. Yeah, extra credit, people go around that, Regina, as far as extra credit. And the extra credit should have some connection to the learning outcomes. I've seen some instructors do extra credit where it's, go do this random thing and write a page on it. It's like to make up seat time or something. And it's got to be tied to the outcomes somehow. Give them extra opportunities to meet the learning outcomes is the way I would look at it. And you can call it extra credit. You can call it whatever you want. Absolutely. Yeah, use humor. Again, that's part of just, being human, being personal with students. Be careful using sarcasm. You really want to have a rapport before using sarcasm. But using humor, there are boundaries with that, but definitely using humor. Things don't have to be serious and stuffy. Avoid springing surprises on students. Oh my gosh, I've seen that so much over the last 2 years. And part of that is, the instructors have been thrown into experiences they weren't ready for the most part, and they were adapting and kind of having to figure it out as they went along. And so there were a lot of surprises dumped on students, or if they weren't able to have live meetings, then they not only recorded their 50-minute lectures, let's say, but they also dumped additional content on students that they wouldn't have otherwise, to try and make up for what they felt like they weren't teaching students. So Students, in some cases, were getting a lot of surprises and a lot of dumping on them. And again, I'm sensitive to the fact that everybody was put into a very difficult situation, but that was one of the results. Yeah, playing music again, Christine and folks, you can kind of, again, find your comfort levels as far as playing music. I know an instructor who does a survey at the beginning of the class, a learner connectedness survey. And one of the things he asks is for, like your 3 favorite songs. And he'll then compile a Spotify list. And I know the different viewpoints on Spotify currently, but that's an example. And then he can, as people are joining the Zoom session, he can be playing one of those songs just to help try and connect to what the students are enjoying and what they're thinking about in their daily lives, music and other things like that. Puppy cams like that. Humor again, yes. Yeah, resiliency. I mean, we could talk about mindset, how to really look at a growth mindset. That's a whole different focus we could talk about, but that's really important, how to be assets based with your students and set them up, not fix them, set them up for a growth mindset, not a fixed mindset. I don't talk about grit because I don't think grit can be important, but I don't think we should rely on grit. We shouldn't tell students, oh, you just need to have more grit. No, we all have ownership in how we can support students and help them and build a growth mindset, which enables grit. But we can't just say you need more grit. You're not trying hard enough. Okay. Sorry, that was bordering on soapbox. I'll stop there. Okay, so great. Thanks for all the comments there, contributions, I would like to call them. And then let's just look at some other things that have popped up. And there were things that popped up this morning. I thought, wow, these are also fabulous related resources, but you got to stop somewhere. Anybody see this article over the weekend? So there's a professor at Yale who teaches this psychology course about happiness, and it's their highest enrolled course at Yale. And the article was really about how even the students, anxiety is even destroying student experiences in that course. So that was a really timely article that I learned from reading and hearing her perspective and what she's seeing even from her own students in this happiness course. And there's this happiness quotient, and she's able to say, well, short term, there's definitely benefit to this course for students and their happiness. Long term, there are other things that they're definitely need to manage going forward. But it's interesting, the instructor is actually going on a leave of absence, and the interviewer said, well, you're burnt out yourself. And she said, no, let's stop right there. I'm not burnt out, but I could see where I'm heading toward burnout, and I'm taking steps to avert that. So anyway, that was a good article from Lori Santos. If any of you have seen that, and Kelly's just popped that into the chat, thank you. And then another one I think great is pedagogy of kindness. So if you look at Kate Denial, and I've put her contact info and then the link for this article, and just a couple of the quotes there. Kindness as pedagogical practice distills down to 2 simple things: believing people and believing in people. And I just love that quote. We have to believe the good intentions of our students and enable that. And certainly there are things we need to do to make sure that they are moving forward ethically and following policy to a certain extent. But we have to believe in the good and move forward, and then manage things as they come up, not expect otherwise. Okay, so that's another good one. If you haven't seen Kate's work, that's a few years old, but as relevant as ever. And then, third one there, 5, if you're wanting to really go into empathy and work in life, these are just 5 guidelines I came across in another article that just came out this month through Psychology Today. So that was another good one. And so certainly things that we've talked about there, except for hire for curiosity, but think about the curiosity and tapping into the curiosity of the students that you work with. All right, Jordan, I'll turn it over to you for the last couple moments here.
Yeah, I'm going to take us home here. So yeah, thank you guys again for all being here today. Really loved the participation in Padlet and chat. Ashonda and Brett, thank you guys so much. I think this was a really meaningful and important topic to cover. So thank you so much. As you guys can see here, we have 2 upcoming webinars. The first one on March 16th will be Dear Faculty, What Students Wish Faculty Understood. This will be a roundtable discussion with more of our student success coaches. on March 30th. Brett and Carrie, our CEO and founder of O'Donnell Learn, will lead Disruptions Don't Have to Be Distractions. This will cover how micro adjustments to your teaching can be more effective and successful in the year of yet more disruption. So hoping we can see everybody here today at those as well. Please share with your friends and faculty also. We'd love to have them on for the next 2 webinars here. And if there's anything else, I think we're good. Everybody enjoy the rest of the week out there. All right. Thank you guys.
Thanks, everybody.